welcome to the Games That Made Us podcast. So it's just me today. While we were doing the episode about Vector Man and Metal Slug, the three of us got into a conversation about Sega, and specifically kind of our frustrations with the decision-making that Sega had in the early 90s, and our thoughts on kind of where that put them. Specifically, some of the stuff with Sega of Japan wanting to kind of direct the company in a certain direction, Sega of America pulling in the opposite way. It wasn't really apropos to what we were talking about in the episode, so I cut it out, but I thought it might be kind of fun to just edit it together as a little supplemental and drop it out here. So this is not episode 5. We'll call this episode 4.5. And it's just going to be a little, bite-sized conversation. I think this will probably edit under 10 minutes that, I thought you guys might enjoy. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Previous Brent. Really interesting because given the timing of this, we're post Donkey Kong Country. And so when I booted this up for the first time to play it, my initial thought was, oh, I get it. Sega is seeing all the pre-rendered graphics that Rare did for Donkey Kong Country. And they're going, oh, we want to get in on that action. It's like, yeah, but the thing with Donkey Kong Country is it's an incredibly accessible game with a cute platform mascot that everybody's already familiar with. Nobody thought of Donkey Kong as a platformer hero. He was still the arcade guy that threw barrels, but he was like a character that people knew. The reason Donkey Kong Country was successful wasn't the pre-rendered graphics. It was successful because it was a really fun, accessible game with music by our long-term frenemy David Wise. Sega going out and contracting a American developer to make a pre-rendered 3D balls run and gun. I'm like, God, you got to hand it to Sega. If it's possible to totally miss the boat on what the fuck's going on, they do, and they do spectacularly. They miss the plot so hard.
It seems like they were destined to, like they always did, with the absolute dearth of titles for the Dreamcast. And I'm really wandering really far afield.
No, that's fine.
But like, I think it shows the headspace that their executives were in when they were constantly developing, but probably feeling behind the ball all the time. Like, if they had developed games and acted as though they were the driving force, maybe they would have done better for longer. Yeah. But it always seemed like they were chasing the rabbit that Nintendo was dragging, Well, and like they were Nintendo. If Nintendo was the rabbit at the track, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Sega's the one chasing it. Right. So.
And I feel like so much of that was because Nintendo and then eventually Sony were so much more successful in Japan that Sega corporate was always chasing them. But if you look at, our experience is so counter to that, because the Genesis, it didn't wind up winning the console wars in North America, but it was only by a couple percentage points. I mean, I think it wound up being like 48-52 here, whereas they only had, I think, like less than 10% market share in Japan. The TurboGrafx did better than the Genesis in Japan. And so they went the direction that they thought Japan would want with the Saturn and then the Dreamcast. And when Japan was never their real market for their consoles. And I think that really wound up being the thing that killed them.
I think it probably has something to do with the difference between business decisions and creative decisions. Whereas, like, the games themselves don't suffer. The games are great. The Genesis has fantastic titles. They have some RPGs that compete with Final Fantasy just fine. They have, there's some isometric titles. There's a ton of platformers and fighters. Like, it doesn't compete on a creative level, but you can tell that some of the the business, like the marketing with Vector Man is enough to kind of give you an idea of where they were at.
Well, yeah, they wanted to be bigger and badder than Nintendo. They were totally righteous 90s. I mean, that was all Tom Kalinski's marketing for Sega in that era, was like, we do what Nintendo don't.
Which is, it's true, but it's also ironic where Vector Man was supposed to be like kind of a direct competitor to like Donkey Kong Country.
Right.
Like that's why they spent so much time on the animation and the sprites and making it kind of give it that 3D feel like what Donkey Kong Country had. Yet the fucking game was never released in Japan. Vector Man never released in Japan. So it's like you're trying to be a competitor to Nintendo, and you're not even get a release where you can directly at least attempt to compete.
Yeah, not like, compete in the same market.
Yeah, like at least in Japan you may not sell as many units, but at least you're still competing. You might be able to grab an audience to come in and keep playing your games. If you don't release at all in the country, it's like, are you already admitting you've lost?
Anyway, thanks for joining us on the marketing that made Kirk and Brent.
The marketing that made Kirk. Yeah.
Well, no, and it frustrates me no end, because I, like, still to this day, I was not a Sega kid. I was a Nintendo kid, but I always really liked Sega stuff. And the fact that they couldn't get their head out of their ass enough to have a unified strategy, because I will bet you dollars to donuts that the reason why it never released in Japan is because Sega of America was the one that contracted the game. And just like they did with the EA Sports titles, Sega of America had their own contracts developing their own games, which is why, like, the Sega CD had a totally different library here than it did in Japan. The Sega CD in Japan is all shmups and RPGs. It's all games that I would have loved to fucking play. And over here, it was fucking Night Trap and Sewer Shark.
Night Trap, oh my god.
Because Sega of America and Sega of Japan could not come up with a unified strategy. And so Sega of America would just go out and contract their own games. They'd make their own games that never released outside of the United States. And so our view of Sega here in the US is so different than how the rest of the world views Sega. Yeah. And it's like,
And as a result, now they're Nintendo's bitch.
Right. So. Yeah. Now they just put cream and cheese and Big the Cat and every fucking...
Mario Sports and Olympics, or Smash Bros. Or whatever.
I will say I really enjoy Mario and Sonic at the Tokyo Olympics. I was playing that with my daughter.
Sonic and Super Smash Bros. Is pretty cool too, but it's still just like you could have still been your own company, or at least like a console making company if you, like you said, if they would have just got their head out of their own ass.
Yeah. All right. Well, I didn't mean to let us run off too much, but I thought it was good stuff. Hey, everybody, Future Brent. So, like I say, just a quick little supplemental thing that I clipped out episode 4 that I thought somebody might enjoy. We'll be back on the 4th of March with our next episode, which will cover Alpha Centauri, as well as its expansion, Alien Crossfire. I hope you guys enjoyed this little bonus content, and we will talk to you again soon.